Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and GPS no longer works. Your bank transfers fail. Cargo ships lose navigation. Air traffic slows. Military communications degrade. Energy trading systems begin malfunctioning. Stock exchanges experience timing disruptions. And suddenly the global economy starts breaking down, not because of a cyber attack, not because of a nuclear war, but because satellites in orbit were disabled. That sounds like science fiction. It isn't, because space is quietly becoming the most important strategic domain on Earth, and almost nobody outside defense circles is paying attention. What's happening right now above our heads is a historic transformation, a trillion-dollar commercial boom, a military arms race, and a geopolitical power struggle, all happening simultaneously. And the countries and companies that dominate space over the next decade may dominate the global economy itself. After spending years working on strategy and development for space, cyber, and intelligence programs at Northrop Grumman, I can tell you this with confidence. The new space race is already underway, and most people still think space is about rockets. It's not. It's about power. In this video, we are going to break down why governments are suddenly pouring unprecedented money into space, why satellites are now considered military targets, how commercial companies became part of modern warfare, why the Iran conflict changed the rules of space sovereignty, why the next trillion-dollar industry may be above the Earth, and why investors, governments, and corporations are completely underestimating what's coming. Because the future of geopolitics may increasingly be decided in orbit. Space is now a war-fighting domain. For decades, most people viewed space as relatively peaceful. That era is over. Today, military planners increasingly see orbit the same way naval strategists once viewed the oceans. Control space, and you control communications, intelligence, navigation, missile warning, targeting, logistics, and increasingly AI-enabled warfare. Lose space, and entire military systems begin collapsing. That's why the United States Space Force is now massively expanding. The proposed 2027 budget is extraordinary, more than $70 billion. That includes billions for missile tracking, satellite communications, space warfare systems, and thousands of additional personnel. But here is the really important part. This is not just an American trend. Globally, military space spending has now surpassed civilian space spending for the first time in history. That is a massive signal. Governments are no longer treating space as a scientific environment. They are treating it as contested territory, and the threats are growing fast. Russia is reportedly testing anti-satellite capabilities. China is developing advanced counterspace systems. The United States is heavily investing in orbital resilience. India demonstrated anti-satellite weapons years ago, and the toolbox is expanding rapidly. Jamming, spoofing, hacking, laser dazzling, orbital interception, electronic warfare. The age of safe satellites is ending, and that changes everything. Now let's talk about what could become the biggest space defense project since Apollo, the Golden Dome. President Donald Trump's proposed missile defense initiative. At first glance, it sounds like a traditional missile shield. It is not. Because modern missile defense increasingly depends on space, you need satellites for early warning, tracking, target discrimination, interception support, communications, and battle management. Space becomes the nervous system, and the numbers involved are staggering. The White House is reportedly requesting nearly $20 billion in 2027 alone, but some congressional estimates place the total long-term cost at around $1.2 trillion. Think about that for a second. That's not a procurement program. That's an industrial transformation. And historically, massive government spending programs create entire ecosystems around them. Apollo did, the Cold War did, the Internet did. Golden Dome could do the same thing for the next generation of space infrastructure, not just rockets, but AI, cybersecurity, sensors, communications, on-orbit servicing, satellite autonomy, data fusion, and advanced manufacturing. This is where investors need to pay attention, because the biggest winners may not be the obvious names. Commercial space is now part of warfare. One of the biggest misconceptions about modern conflict is that war is still mostly fought by governments. That is increasingly untrue. Commercial companies are now deeply embedded in military operations, and nowhere is that more obvious than space. Take Starlink. When the Ukraine war intensified, commercial satellite communications suddenly became strategically critical. Entire military operations relied on privately owned infrastructure. That would have sounded absurd 15 years ago. But today, commercial space systems are directly influencing battlefield outcomes. And it's not just communications. Commercial satellite imagery has become enormously important for intelligence gathering. Governments now depend heavily on private sector orbital data. In some cases, governments are even asking commercial firms to restrict imagery access during conflicts to prevent adversaries from gaining targeting intelligence. Think about how extraordinary that is. Private companies now possess strategic capabilities once monopolized by superpowers. That changes the relationship between corporations and states forever, because if your satellites affect military outcomes, you are no longer merely a commercial actor. You are part of the battlespace. The Iran war has changed the rules. Now here is the development I think many analysts are underestimating. The Iran conflict may have fundamentally changed how smaller powers think about space access, because traditionally only major powers could fully leverage space-based military capabilities. That may no longer be true. Reports suggest Iran used Chinese commercial satellite imagery during the conflict. There are also indications that China may have provided access to the Beidou navigation system. If true, that matters enormously, because it means countries no longer necessarily need their own advanced satellite constellations. Instead, they can plug into someone else's. That creates an entirely new geopolitical model. Future alliances may increasingly include navigation access, commercial imagery sharing, orbital communication support, and intelligence integration. In other words, space alliances. And for countries unable to build sovereign capabilities themselves, alignment with a major space power could become strategically essential. This is one reason why the competition between the United States and China is becoming so important. Because both countries are increasingly building not just military alliances, but technological ecosystems. Here we are, and the commercial space economy is about to explode. Now let's shift from geopolitics to economics, because despite all the military discussion, the commercial side of space may become even larger. The global space economy is already worth more than $600 billion annually. Some forecasts put it near $1.8 trillion within a decade, and this growth is happening because launch economics have changed dramatically. For most of history, getting to orbit was brutally expensive. Now, reusable rockets, rideshare launches, miniaturized satellites, better computing power, and cheaper manufacturing are collapsing barriers to entry. And once launch costs fall, completely new industries become viable. Zero-gravity pharmaceuticals, orbital manufacturing, space-based solar power, quantum sensing, laser communications, on-orbit refueling, lunar mining. This is why so many venture capital firms are aggressively entering the sector. Because investors increasingly believe space is becoming a foundational economic layer, not merely an aerospace niche. And here is another critical point. The real money may not be in launch itself. SpaceX has already transformed that market. The more attractive opportunities may be the infrastructure around orbit, data integration, cybersecurity, space logistics, ground systems, orbital servicing, AI-enabled analytics, and satellite resilience. In many ways, this resembles the early internet. The biggest opportunities may emerge one layer above the core infrastructure. There is a massive talent shortage, but there is a major problem emerging. The industry may not have enough skilled people to execute all of this. Space systems are extraordinarily technical, and expertise takes years to develop. Meanwhile, governments are trying to launch multiple major programs simultaneously while parts of the experienced acquisition workforce are shrinking. That creates serious bottlenecks, and the private sector faces the same issue. Demand is exploding for AI engineers, cybersecurity specialists, robotics experts, advanced manufacturing talent, orbital systems engineers, machine learning developers. Talent is becoming a strategic resource. In fact, one of the biggest risks for investors may not be technology failure. It may be execution failure. Governments can announce trillion-dollar ambitions, but actually building complex orbital systems at scale is much harder. Now here is the truly dangerous part. Technology is advancing much faster than international governance. Right now, there are still major unanswered questions like, what happens if commercial satellites are attacked during wartime? And if you think space still does not matter, just remember, the modern world runs on infrastructure most people never see. And increasingly, that infrastructure is above your head.